Please welcome Andrew Ross Sorkin and his guests, Chair and CEO of Eli Lilly and Company, David Ricks, and obesity medicine physician at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School, Dr. Fatima Cody Stanford.
I've been excited about this conversation for a very, very long time. When you think right now about the most significant innovations of our lifetime, those with the potential to change humanity and our health, one of them is, of course, the new blockbuster drug class of drugs called GLP-1s. And that's the conversation I really wanted to have today. You know these names like Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy. Together, they're projected to generate more than $20 billion in annual sales. And the promise of GLP-1s is beyond weight loss. Early studies suggest it may help with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, liver disease, kidney failure, even sleep apnea. And we're learning more every single day. And so to explore all of this and what it means for society, please join me in welcoming the following people. David Ricks is here. He's the CEO of Eli Lilly. It's the world's most valuable pharmaceutical company, more than $750 billion. Dr. Fatima Cody Stanford is here. She is a leading expert on obesity. She is a professor at Harvard Medical School, physician at Massachusetts General Hospital. And as I said at the very beginning of the day, she happens to be Oprah's go-to expert on this very topic. So thank you both for being here. I want to just, before we actually get into this, and I just hope you'll join me in this, because we haven't talked about this all day, and I know some of you have been looking at your phone, so I apologize, but I just want to raise this. You know, there was a terrible shooting. I don't know if everybody has even been familiar with what just happened here earlier this morning. This was the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson, just in front of the Hilton Hotel this morning while we were effectively on stage, fatally shot. And he was at an investor conference, and I know you know him.
I do, yeah.
And I just wanted to raise it with the room because we've all been together and we haven't discussed it, and it's a tragedy.
Yeah.
But you did know him.
I mean, it's shocking. Yeah, he was assassinated essentially in the street going to his investor conference. I mean, this was a person with apparently a silencer on his weapon who stalked him and had a mask on and shot him in the street on 6th Avenue and 54th, a few blocks from here.
It's a remarkable thing.
Yeah.
And you knew him well?
I mean, he wasn't a friend, but we do a lot of business together. So, yeah.
Well, I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry about that. Yeah. And I just wanted to acknowledge it because it's such a tragedy, and I know we hadn't acknowledged it earlier this morning, and I wanted to do that. And I know it's a little off topic here,
but it's odd. I can't remember the last time something like this would have happened.
I cannot. I mean, it is really it is, and I just feel for his family. Let's pivot, if we could, to this issue of GLP-1s. I saw you a couple months ago when we were talking about how this may very well be a miracle drug. And that's what it feels like. That's what it seems like to a lot of us. And I just want to really understand whether it is in your mind and how far you think it really can go in terms of what it is capable of. Because we've seen what it can do for weight loss, but we're really now talking about it doing a lot more than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we've been working in this space for a long time. We launched the first GLP-1 medication in 2005. And when I say that, a lot of people find that odd because this feels like a very new story. But a lot of drug development happens that way as we kind of stumble and sometimes discover our way into new spaces. This GLP-1 is a hormone that our guts secrete after we eat. There are other hormones like it, by the way, which is going to be part of this story, that signal satiety to your brain. They signal metabolic factors in terms of how you process food. And we've learned how to harness that to make a medicine that decreases appetite and causes people to lose weight, also controls many metabolic factors we know about. So we use them first in diabetes, now we're using them in weight loss. We now have cardiovascular evidence, and you talked about in your opening many, many other potential uses. Those studies are underway in a big way. Lilly, right now we have 100 clinical trials going on with this mechanism in various diseases.
Doctor, when did you realize this was something?
Well, we've known about this for quite some time. I think that, he really touched on something. We think about the GLP-1 receptor agonist as a new thing. 2005 obviously was almost 20 years ago. We're about to go into the new year. And when we think about that medication, that was exenatide, which was the first GLP-1 receptor agonist used for the treatment of type 2 diabetes. So we knew about these and we were using these medications in those individuals. But what we saw in those initial studies was the signal for the loss of adiposity adiposity. Adipose is this metabolically active organ that is fat. And we started to see that signal in those early clinical studies that patients were losing adiposity. Now, of course, the degree of adipose distribution and loss was much less compared to what we're seeing now in the studies, particularly if we're looking at the medication that Lilly has, which is a dual agonist, a combination of a GLP-1 receptor agonist and a GIP, which is a glucose insulin-tropic polypeptide. You try to say that 3 times fast. Now, that medication, of course, is a combination medication under the name of tirzepatide. The trade name is Mounjaro and Zepbound, where we see 22.5% total body weight loss compared to the early days of exenatide, where we didn't see that. But when we're saying, oh, we don't know anything about how these medications will work, or they're too early for us to tell, that's really a lie, right? We have over 20 years of data where we can see clinical trials that demonstrate the utility.
What else is it doing? It's not clearly just a weight issue. As we're talking about all of these other things, it seems to be about inflammation.
Right.
It seems to have all sorts of other impacts. So what is that?
Well, so how we think about it, and Doctor can jump in, but there's these direct effects of lower weight, and that's a lot about metabolism, which is use of energy. And those affect systems like your heart, stroke, diabetes, the things we think about in terms of lipids, glucose metabolism, and lowering your weight changes all of that in a positive way. Most of that evidence is now published and built, and we know being leaner is good for all those conditions. We also now know getting leaner using a medicine does the same thing. I think what you're getting at are these secondary effects. So you mentioned inflammation. You know, that we have a pilot study, our competitor Novo just did a very interesting study which showed knee pain reduction that would have made it the most effective drug for pain that we've seen in the last 20 years. Now, some of that must be mechanically offloading weight on the knee, but some of it is also this anti-inflammatory effect. How that's working exactly still needs to be further kind of studied and looked at, but I think that's fascinating because inflammation is a whole other category of disease beyond metabolic effects that afflicts adults in very significant ways.
Doctor, are you seeing it impact other things? I mean, the folks that you've prescribed this to, clearly, by the way, I should tell you, you're not supposed, what you told me the other day, that you cannot call people or say that it's for obesity. It's for people who
people with obesity.
People with obesity.
All of you listening, because I know it's a lot of reporters in here, you know that you guys are listening, please delete the word obese out of your vocabulary. Okay, so you guys want you to hear that. Obese is a label. Obesity is a disease. People have obesity. We should be using person-first language and respecting these patients. 75% of Americans, 75%, that's the number that came out in the Lancet just 2 weeks ago, 75% of Americans have overweight and obesity. Okay, I'm going to say that again. 75% of Americans have overweight and obesity. That is 3/4 of the country. When we don't recognize this and we call persons obese, that is stigmatizing. Persons with obesity, like persons with diabetes, persons with heart disease.
Or AIDS, yeah.
Persons with cancer. So not an obese person, a person with obesity, a person with overweight or obesity.
The natural follow-up, which is you just said there's 75% of the country.
Unfortunately, 75% of the United States currently has overweight and obesity, which means only 25% of our persons currently in the United States today, December 4th, 2024, do not have overweight and obesity.
So do you think that 75% of the country should be on these drugs?
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we do have a problem. You can say, Houston, we have a problem, but we do have a problem. And when we talk about prevention, which I'm all about, we have to recognize that we already have 75% of the country with overweight and obesity. So we've already gotten into the problem, okay? The problem has already left the gate, okay? So when we're dealing with this, we have to recognize the problem is already here.
So, I mean, people talk about this market being obviously huge.
Yep.
What percentage of this country, just as an example, do you think will ultimately be on some version of these drugs?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to think about a pretty high percentage. Now, what's high? That? Well, yeah, what is that? If we look at the peak use of like statins in the U.S., it was, something like a fifth of all Americans. So I think the health advantages of incretins, GLP-1 medications are probably as good or better than statins. So you can make an argument it could go higher than that. But there is, of course, an affordability and payment issue. You probably want to ask me about that.
Yes.
Right now, the major problem we see is that many, many employers, probably some in this room, don't cover with their insured plan obesity medications, even though, as the doctor said, it is a disease. That needs to change. And until that does, there's just a limit on the number of people who out of pocket pay for these medications.
So let me ask you, though, specifically about that, and I'm going to quote Bernie Sanders.
Oh, great.
I thought you'd appreciate that. He said, "There's no rational reason other than greed why Mounjaro should cost $1,069 a month in the U.S., but just $485 in the U.K., $94 in Japan. Even with the modest price reductions for Zepbound, millions of Americans will still be unable to afford the diabetes and weight loss drugs they desperately need." What has to happen to make them cheaper?
So let me unpack that. First of all, in the U.S., we have an archaic system where the net price is not the list price. All those other prices are actually what the government pays. In our system, $1,060 is only what individuals pay if they don't have a copay card. But our average price is, let's just say, around $500. It's still above those levels. But the way we think about access, and in Japan's a good example, is whoever walks into their doctor and says, "I think I may need one of these medications," and the doctor agrees, and it's on label, they get the medicine, they get it for very low out of pocket, usually a few dollars, and there's no prior authorizations, no qualifications, and they get it for the rest of their life. They don't have to wait till their plan renew, et cetera. That's what we would call open access. And I think, and I'll say this on stage here, if any employer, if anyone in the U.S. wants to create that setting, we can match those prices. It's not about profiteering on the back of Americans. It's about a system where we have to give a slice of every bit of our revenue all the way down and then fight with the patient to gain access to the product. And even then, it renews every year and they have to go through the process again. So if we knew we could have volume, we can price against that.
Doctor?
Yes.
What do you think of that?
I think that we have some work to do. I think that we could work to get better access to these therapies. What we do know is that I fight every day to make sure that my patients can get access to the medications, and I know that it's a fight that works against my patients typically. Insurers I fight with. I can tell you that I decide with my patient that, let's say, Lilly's drug is the best drug for them, but the insurers fight back against me. They'll say, no, this isn't the best drug. I don't think that this is appropriate because of the price, or we just don't want to approve this medication for whatever reason. So I think a lot needs to be done within the American healthcare system to ensure that the best drug is being utilized for the appropriate patient.
Right. Talking about appropriate patient, there is a question about some of the people who are using this drug, at least today. Mm-hmm. You know where, I believe, the most per capita use of this drug is?
The Upper East Side. I wonder where that might be located.
So what do you think is going on with that? I mean, is that a real problem?
So I think in media circles, when we talk to Wall Street analysts, I hear that a lot. But so I looked up the data. The average body mass index, that's the complicated score we use to see if someone's obese, over 30 is obese. The average on Zepbound right now is 37 in America. So just like I'm 6'1", 185. To be BMI of 37, I'd have to weigh 285. So I think that is obese. That's the average person on our drug. There probably are people who don't need it and are accessing it. We have a point of view about that, which is that, especially in a shortage situation, which we've gone through, right now not the case, but that seems wrong to us. And we should direct the medicine to those who need it most. That's what we're trying to do.
Do you think that we're all in some way going to be on these drugs? Either you're working on a pill form of
we
this.
are. Next year we'll get new data.
So it's not
on
a shot.
Yeah.
People who are trying to control their urges and addictions and other things. I mean, that's the other question mark about all this, whether we're all going to be taking some version of this.
Well, I do think that we see different use case scenarios for these medications. Right now, we've been talking mostly about cardiometabolic health. What do I mean by that? Obesity, diabetes. I just gave a conference at the National Academies of Medicine in September where we're starting to look at different use case scenarios. Things like alcohol use disorder, opioid use disorder. We also were talking about things like Parkinsonism, Alzheimer's disease. So we're going to see different disease processes begin to come into the mix when we're looking at GLP-1 receptor agonists that get outside of the cardiometabolic sphere. But even within the cardiometabolic sphere, we are looking at things that were mentioned, things that we used to call fatty liver disease, which is now called metabolic-associated steatotic liver disease, just to make things a little bit more complicated for all of you when you're reporting, and what we call now MASH, which used to be called NASH, is metabolic-associated steatotic hepatitis. Of course, we're talking about HFpEF, which is heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. We're seeing significant differences there. We're seeing so many different potential benefit with obstructive sleep apnea. We're going to see so many different use case scenarios with these medications that I think that we are going to see broad scale use.
The downsides, though, because I was going to say, we talk about Ozempic face, the loss of muscle mass. I mean, it sounds like it's not a panacea.
No, no drug is. We make all kinds of medicines. Every effective drug has side effects. They need to be used under the supervision of a doctor. The primary one, because we have 20 years of data, that we do see is nausea, GI upset when you initiate the drugs. But through titration, that can be minimized. People who have a history of pancreatitis should not use these drugs. Otherwise, and we've studied tirzepatide more than any other medicine in the history of Lilly, and we're an old company. We don't see warning signs that you would worry about. Pregnancy, we don't have data on. Those are the things we warn patients on. But just back to your original question, there's a whole pipeline of these things coming. We have 11 ourselves. There's probably 60 in the industry. People will pursue them for all those uses you've mentioned, and some of them only for those uses. So I think in 5 years, we could find ourselves with a pill that is a GLP-1 or like mechanism that is for people who have alcohol use disorder or do use opioids. In an extreme way. There is an anti-hedonic effect here where it suppresses your...
Would you short alcohol companies and food companies?
Well, we have a lot more factories to build before we get to that. Right now, we're seeing about 7-8 million Americans on these every month. We need to get that number way up to short those companies. But in a way, maybe those behaviors which aren't good for us we'll do less of, and that will have consequences.
What do you make of the muscle loss and things like that? I mean, how much should people be concerned about that?
Well, I think we're going to see some new medications that are coming down the pike that will help with muscle building. So there'll be some changes and shifts. I can tell you that several of the companies, including Lilly, are looking at some things to help with muscle mass. And we're going to see some modifications and lifestyle modifications. So how do we encourage patients in terms of their regimens, in terms of building? How much strength training are they doing? How much protein supplementation are they having in their lifestyle to ensure that they're retaining lean muscle as we're seeing the muscle potential for muscle loss with these medications?
Maybe an analogy that's interesting as you think about breakthroughs in medicine. And, I was saying backstage, what did oral contraception do for women, right? It allowed people to control their reproduction. Maybe the dream scenario here is we can use these medicines to control like our urges, and including food, but maybe other things. And that would be, those studies are going to happen, and we'll know the answer to that. But that would be, I think, a breakthrough across health.
We're going to run out of time, but let me ask you one question. As a CEO of a major pharmaceutical company in this country, RFK Jr. is potentially about to be your...
Time to go.
Is about to become your regulator, depending on what happens in Washington. And I'm just curious what your reaction to that name and that appointment is.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously said and acted on things that are what we would call anti-science. Now, on the other hand, I think the reason Trump embraced him and the reason he had enjoyed some popularity was this interesting mix, a little bit of this anti-science, but also pro-health. So, like all new things, we'll start with a blank sheet of paper and say, we're pro-health. I've got 44,000 employees wake up every day trying to make America healthy again. So we can get behind that. Now, what the specifics are, we'll have to talk about, but a world without medicine isn't a good world.
But are you worried about, I mean, he has literally talked about telling folks, if you work at the FDA, save your documents. Pack your bags and save your documents.
That's concerning. FDA is the gold standard regulator in the world, and we're the only country on earth that does primary data review, meaning when the company creates data, only the FDA reviews every digit of that data. No other regulator on earth does that. I think that's a value to society we need to keep. We'll argue that strongly with our new regulator.
We are over time, but I do want to thank you both
Great to be here.
for this fabulous conversation. It is changing the world. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thanks.